My name is Mike Sanders, and like you said, I help individuals with disabilities back in the workplace. We've helped out over 100,000 people across the country, and during that time, a lot of the people who come to us, they take maybe about 3 to 5 years to come back into the workplace again because of their injury or illness. And I've had a chance to talk to most people who have been successful within our program. And essentially, I noticed the same common trend of transitioning back from a trauma into coming back into the workplace. And I noticed the same type of thing that happened in my own life when I came back from trauma, and I also noticed it in the lives of other people, how they came on back. So basically, I coined this phrase, impact back. And at one point in our lives, we'll experience something that negatively impacts us. A series of emotions that change the way our mind is and shape it and add negative constructs. So it could be a death of a loved one, it could be a breakup, it could be a loss of a job, an injury or illness. But you can take that negative trauma, capture the learning moments, and transition your life as well as the life of others. Like a phoenix rising from the ashes. So I like to describe the concept of impact back by visualizing the face of a watch. On a watch, you have seconds, minutes, and hours. In the concept of impact back, you have self-diagnosis, you have action, and you have results. Each one of them, they have their own separate purpose, but they're all interrelated. And if you could picture it like the hands on a watch, they go past each other, they go over each other, and they come back again in a continuous cycle. Just like the way we interpret our life experiences. So I like to describe to you the concept of impact back through a fun example at first. And I like to call this one the crisis of the curdled milk. So my roommate Wayne desired a bowl of cereal at 3 a.m. He decided to come downstairs, pour his bowl of cereal, and ended up going into the fridge, finding the container labeled milk, applied milk to his cereal, and proceeded to consume. But what he didn't know was I might have forgotten to throw that milk out by 6, 7, maybe 8 weeks. In my fridge, expiration dates have no bounds. So, needless to say, I came down the next morning, and on the counter, there was the container of milk, and on there was affixed a Post-it note, and it said June 1st on it, exclamation point. And I thought, that's funny, it's July 28th. And so, so needless to say, Wayne got really sick from this, and he started going into his level of, or the cycle of impact back. And over the next 24 hours, he ended up going through the self-diagnosis stage. And basically he had shame, he had fear, he had a lot of anger because he ended up getting sick. But he took responsibility for his actions, and he basically said, hey, you know, maybe I shouldn't have drank Mike's milk, or maybe I should have checked the expiration date beforehand. And essentially he ended up going into the next stage, which is action and developing a plan. So what he did in his plan was mapped it out. He was going to yell at me. Number 2, he was going to clean out the fridge, and number 3, he was going to mark everything in there with expiration date and black Sharpie marker, which he did to fulfill the first part of the results stage. And essentially, in that results stage, he continued on to pay it forward. He continued on to continuous improvement. And essentially what he ended up doing was putting this little spreadsheet on the fridge and marking up everything in the fridge with expiration dates that look like Graffiti Central. So To pay it back forward, what he ended up doing was taking the pictures I took of him cleaning out the fridge, and as well as his experience, posted on Facebook. And it got a lot of likes and responses, but it prompted 8 other people to clean out their fridge, saving them from equally devastating belly aches. So, if you could indulge me, now that you've seen an example of impact back in action, a fun example, if you could indulge me, I'd like to tell you a little bit about my college experience. During my first semester, I really struggled. While my friends were off studying, when my friends were off going out on the weekends, I was studying. And when they were doing other things out there, my head was constantly in the books. So needless to say, the results were D's, F's, and I got a B+, surprisingly. Needless to say, I was put on academic probation, and I had to meet with the dean. So the next day I met with Dick Grant, and we talked about my experience. He thought it was weird that I spent so much time studying and wasn't getting all A's. So essentially what I had to do was go meet with a psychologist to determine if I had a learning disability. So the next week I was freaking out, and the next week I ended up meeting with Dr. Al-Siri at Stonehill, and we went through a series of exercises. So the exercises included math, puzzles, auditory exercises, and with the puzzles, I excelled at those. Dr. Siri was kind of surprised at how quickly I was able to accomplish these puzzles. Like one 4-minute puzzle took me 14 seconds to complete. So I was able to take and process images in such a way that was done very quickly. And then we went up to the auditory exercises. And those were problematic. So when we started doing the auditory exercises, all he had to do was say a sentence to me. The sentence was, "The cat ran through the meadow." All I had to do was repeat it. And essentially, I couldn't do it. I struggled. I tried doing it again, and it came out all jumbled. And he said to me, "Mike, how many of your classes are lecture?" I said 4 out of 5. And then he said, "How many classes are you failing?" And I said 4 out of 5. He closed the book. He said, "I think we found our problem." So thank you for indulging me on that. We're going to come back to that in a little bit. But essentially what I want to do is tell you about impact back in my friend Stephen. So Stephen was a construction worker who fell asleep at the wheel one night. He ended up getting a T4 spinal cord injury, no longer had use of his legs. So he went through a very heavy grieving stage within the impact back cycle. He essentially was feeling embarrassment, shame, different types of feelings, denial. When his friends asked him how he was doing, he said, "Great, I couldn't be better, I'm on the mend." When really he wasn't accepting the fact that he had a disability and things were going to change in his life. But during the acceptance phase, he eventually ended up coming to grips with the fact that he was going to have these limitations, they weren't going to go away, and things were not going to get better unless he put some activity towards it. So in the next step, he took ownership towards this and said, "Hey, I'm going to make a difference. This is my life, and I can't do the things I used to, but I'm going to do the best I can with what I have out there." So essentially, he came on back and said, "I'm going to set up my planning phase in the action step." And essentially what he did was he started brainstorming, what kind of jobs can I do out there? And he thought sales, training, and he always had an interest in becoming a crane operator. So he said, "You know what, I'm going to talk to my ex-coworkers and see if that's a possibility." So he met up with his ex-coworkers, talked about the possibility of becoming a crane operator, and essentially his ex-coworker, John, said to him, "How do you think you're going to be able to get up and down from the cab of the crane? You can't even walk." how do you think you're going to be able to do that job? But Stephen blocked out the noise and said, you know what, this is something I want to do. I'll figure it out. So he visualized himself as a certified crane operator and signed himself up for classes as well as the exam. But he realized John was right. He couldn't get up and down in the cab the way that things currently were. So what he ended up doing was taking a look at different adaptive devices and figured out a way to get up and down the cab. He found a workaround. So essentially, he ended up getting certified as a crane operator, updated his resume, started going for interviews, and no job offers came. What ended up happening was he moved on to the results stage and basically said, hey, I can't do this job out there. I need to move on forward. And he basically said, you know what, instead what I'm going to do is reassess how I'm doing this. I'm going to call up the contract company who trained me, set up my adaptive equipment, and move on forward. So he ended up doing that, and he recorded himself going up and down into the cab and sent that video out to prospective employers along with his cover letter. He ended up getting a job a few weeks later. He did really well within the company, immersed himself within it, and ended up learning everything about it. He ended up becoming a sales representative for that construction company, and then decided, since he was successful, he was going to pay it forward. So he ended up going and working with different disability groups to teach other people how to overcome physical limitations within the workplace. That's what he ended up doing. He impacted back. So now back to my story. After Dr. Siri closed the book, we ended up planning out a couple of different ways for me to leverage my knowledge that was focused on taking visual capabilities and integrating that within my auditory capabilities. We essentially mapped out a plan on how we were going to come back and do this. And essentially I used some of the same skills that you would use with dyslexia. I used different color pens, color-coded my notes, ended up creating mind maps of my lectures that I attended, and ended up visualizing words as images as well as voice, and pictured it as it was going along. Well, the new techniques that I was using, they were similar to what you would use with dyslexia, but they were taking me upward to 60 to 70 hours a week. So I had to continue on with continuous improvement and integrate new techniques so that way I could shorten up the time. Essentially, it was like driving a car while changing the wheels, only, it seemed impossible. So after I did that, my grades increased. I went from D's and F's to A's and B's. I was successful with coming back, and I wanted to pay back to my community out there. So a group of us, 5 students, got together. We wanted to give back to the community, and we wanted to provide a liaison service to help people come on back and volunteer out there. So we created Into the Streets. Well, Into the Streets was a program that was set up here at Stonehill College. I ended up using my skill sets that I learned from Dr. Siri to get information and build the foundation of that program along with 5 other students. And what we ended up doing was setting up information workshops, volunteer events, different types of activities. I even volunteered myself, helping individuals with disabilities at the Raymond Elementary School and counseled them as well as disabled veterans. I was becoming well-rounded and I was making a difference. I was paying change forward. So let me leave you with this. As comedian Josh Blue said, you're one step away, one bad bike ride away from joining the disability community. And that's true. There's over 60 million Americans with disabilities across the United States. What could be okay today, may not be okay tomorrow. So if you do have negative trauma that impacts your life, capture those learning experiences. Integrate them within your own mindset and learn from it. Impact back in your life and the lives of others. Thank you.